My name is Lori Minnick, and before jumping into the introductions of who we have here on the line with us to present, wanted to just give a quick background for those of you that aren't familiar with Nationwide. We are an insurance company that actually started way back in 1926 when we were an insurer to help farmers get the best value they could for auto insurance. Since that time, over the last almost 100 years, we've grown and expanded to provide our customers with solutions and services to stay true to what our promise is, which is to exist to protect people, businesses, and futures with extraordinary care. We are a Fortune 100 company and have also been recently recognized as a best place to work. So we all love Nationwide and are happy to be here with you guys today. As Robin said, my name is Lori Minnick, and I'm a leader in Nationwide in our enterprise performance management and analysis team. I've been with Nationwide for 14 years. Prior to that, I was at Deloitte Consulting. My team is responsible for our planning and forecasting tools, as well as the processes we use across the organization. And we do also support our enterprise management reporting. I have on the line with me also from Nationwide, Steve Coleman, who's our application product manager, and he supports our team from a technology perspective. Adam is on my team, and he's a certified management accountant as well as a CPA, and has been at Nationwide for over 15 years. He's been involved in several Oracle EPM cloud implementations, including our PCMCS solution for allocations, EPRCS for our management reporting, as well as this EPBCS most recent implementation. He's also leading our Center of Excellence, and so has a lot to share from our most recent project experience. So we're really excited that you guys have joined us today to kind of hear about our journey to the cloud. So Adam, if you want to maybe bring up our slides and we can jump right in here.
Great. Can you guys see the slides now?
Not on my end. Has anyone else seen them?
No, I don't see it either.
How about now?
It looks like it's working. Yep.
All right, perfect. So just to give you the backdrop of what's been going on at Nationwide over the last decade and kind of what took us to this place to journey into the cloud, we have spent a lot of time over the last 10 years just upgrading our Hyperion tools. For any of those that still have on-prem applications, we were right there with you every couple of years of having to do those Hyperion upgrades. We had not spent a lot of time updating our capabilities and processes for the planning and forecasting space because we've been spending a lot of our investment in dollars in just doing those upgrades. So we made it a good business case in 2019 to get funding for what we're calling our planning optimization project, which was kind of our first capability uplift since 2012 when we had really built out our first planning and forecasting tools. Next slide. So we divided our project called planning optimization into two phases. We spent a lot of time in 2018 and 2019 doing proof of concepts and pre-project activities to get the business case approved for our project. We kicked it off officially in early 2020, and the first phase of our planning optimization project was departmental expense forecasting. At Nationwide, departmental expenses are things like headcount, salaries, telephones, consulting, all of those things that are required to run a department or disbursement code area. We also built out models for our benefits space, corporate real estate, brand, which is in marketing, an IT specific model. And we divided it into two phases because the groups of users and the types of modeling that is being done, it was mostly expenses in phase one. And we're kicking off just as we speak, phase two, which is in the 2021 effort. That's going to be mostly around our P&L, balance sheet, capital processes. So we'll spend more time today talking to you about our phase one efforts because those have gone live. But just so you know, we did divide the project into two phases. Next slide. So what was going on at Nationwide prior to starting this project? We, as I mentioned in our decade-long history, have been using Hyperion for some time. However, those were always used as a repository or kind of landing zone for the results. All of the modeling was done offline outside of the tool within Excel models, Access models. All of the data feeds were also offline and having to be sourced in manually into those types of models. What we wanted to do was get rid of the models because they did not support any type of what if or ad hoc capabilities. We had ungoverned and uncontrolled data sources. We also had people outside of IT loading data in to do the modeling that they needed. So what we wanted our future state to be was to have a more effective and efficient forecasting process. We wanted to use the pre-built modules within EPBCS. We wanted what if and modeling and better reporting. And we wanted to be able to go to the cloud and not have to do the on-prem upgrades anymore and have a cloud-based solution. Next slide, please. So how do we come up with the word planning optimization for our project name? Well, just the definition of optimization is the process of making something as good or effective as possible. We took that kind of twofold in our project. Sometimes that means less is more, where we got rid of multiple reporting cubes that we needed for forecasting and planning and came up with one solution. Sometimes that might be more is more, where we had one data inbound file going in for forecasting, where we may have really needed 8 data sources to truly do the modeling that was requested by our business partners. Next slide. So the mission, vision, and themes for our project were efficiency, consistency, and simplification. We wanted to streamline our processes and make sure we included best practices. We wanted a consistent solution. I talked about phase 1 being for the expense areas at Nationwide, but we did not have consistency before. We had staff functions in finance, HR, legal, IT, and our business units doing different things. And when you talk about expenses, there's a lot of consistency there that could be gained by having one solution for things that are consistent in nature, things like labor, and we'll talk to you about that in a little more detail. We also wanted the solution to be simplified. With the cloud-based platform, it could easily integrate into our architecture that we are going for at Nationwide. Next slide, please. So when we went live with the project, how were these core themes in action? In the efficiency space, we were able to address in having one salary grade labor planning model across the entire organization. And to give people an idea of how large Nationwide is, we have approximately 25,000 associates. So we're planning salary grade labor for those individuals. We also came up with a seeded forecast methodology, a way of pre-populating our forecast based on some seeding. We came up with more self-service reporting and what-if capabilities. We were able to eliminate almost every offline model that was used in the expense space, as well as automating calculations. And in the simplification, we did a lot around reduction in the manual data loads, and Steve's going to talk to you about in length about the interface work we did, but that was huge to simplify things, as well as some simplification in the reporting space as well. Next slide, please. Guiding principles and best practices. We wanted to make sure, because we've gone down the project space before at Nationwide, we wanted to make sure this project was successful. We wanted to satisfy the business requirements, but at Nationwide, we've tended to sometimes over-engineer the solution. So we wanted to make it as simple as possible. We wanted that standardization to improve our process efficiency. And we wanted to have planning methodologies and models that would be streamlined across the organization to not just move and improve our organization, not just lift and shift what we've previously done. We also brought in industry best practices when we were coming up with the requirements for our project. And then we wanted to reduce our dependency on IT. Some of the key enhancements of the project are the labor planning module that we're very excited about and have been using. That's one labor planning model at the salary grade level. Having a standardized tool that everyone's using. We no longer have Excel and Access models used across the organization. We have all sorts of data integrations that are automated to source our modeling, and enhancing our analytics and being able to give more self-service reporting with a new solution. I'm going to turn it over to Steve now, who's going to take you through some of the data flows in our architecture.
Thank you, Lori. So with this particular slide, over the next couple of slides, I just wanted to show you in fairly simple terms what we did or what we had and then what we moved to with the new project. On this view, anything in gray is going to be a source system. So we, let's see here, probably about between 2017 and right before this project actually kicked off last year, we were installing autonomous data warehouse from Oracle. So that's what the ADW is. That's our warehouse for all our financial data. That was a source system into forecast pre-cube. So anything in black is a cube. Underneath here, you have some business unit specific forecast models where the way it would work in originally would be business would work within Excel models. We had over 18 different models that the business was using, as well as some access databases. Those three things would feed forecast pre, which is a cube, which would then feed PCMCS, which is another Oracle EPM tool, which is profitability cost management cloud service. It'd feed that as our allocation engine. And from those allocations, it's going to move off to a cube called forecast post and a cube called corporate expense, where our business partners would use those to do their forecast and budgeting and reporting off of. You want to change slide, Adam? Working with our chosen implementation partner, Huron, we worked to determine what is the best way to take and remove the source data that wasn't very consistent in nature. We wanted to bring consistency, right? That was part of one of the things that we had for this project. We had 10 different source systems that we wanted to bring in from systems like Workday and Ariba and our PeopleSoft tools, and I'll show you the different source systems in the next slide. But working with our architecture as well as implementation partner, we came up with this very basic pattern that we wanted to use for data integration. You'll see on the left the things that Nationwide was responsible as part of this project. We were responsible from an ETL's perspective of integrating with all the source systems, pulling that data down through ETL to a simple delimited file, dropping that file in a location using Oracle's EPM Automate tool, pick that up, along with ESP, which is our internal scheduling tool that we use to pick that up and deliver to the EPPS application. Once it hit that boundary, the EPPCS application picks it up, uses the internal data management tool that comes with EPPCS, and moves that data into individual cubes. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. I will say when we were doing the different patterns of ETL, probably a large lesson learned for us is that we didn't give ourselves enough time. As Nationwide, we needed to, we had the onus of moving all that data, and our internal ETL teams really didn't understand the data set probably as well as we could have, right, off the beginning. So we took a little longer than normal. So I think looking at phase two, we've actually increased the time that we're going to give our ETL team to make sure that we can stay within our planned scope and schedule. On this new way, this is what it looks like today in its most basic form. We have everything in gray is a source system. So you have Workday, Infit, which is our marketing in-house tool that marketing uses for their forecast thoughts. Then we have PSAM, Ariba, and PlanView, which all feed into certain cubes. So we have a labor cube, the marketing expense cube, and then an IT forecast. From there, those three cubes through, I believe, Smart Push pushes all these things up to the operating expenses cube. We also have more detail going into that OPEX cube through PeopleSoft, again, the autonomous data warehouse, CREL, which is our corporate real estate function, and PSAM again. From there, we continue to feed data back into the allocations engine, where it comes out into our final reporting cube, which is the ROPEX cube. And now I'm going to pass it on to Adam, who's going to continue the presentation.
Great. Hey, thanks, Steve. I just wanted to, I guess, start with the slide that Steve ended on here briefly, and the ROPEX or reporting cube. This was a big one of the optimization enhancements that we had from the project was that we were able to report on both a pre-allocated as well as a post-allocated expense analysis perspective. So this was one of the optimization points that Lori had brought up earlier about less is more and more is less, but we were able to leverage this cube to do kind of our end-to-end reporting, as well as drill back into the other cubes and do some more dimensionalized and detailed reporting analysis. we'll go on to the next slide. What I was going to do now is just kind of go like a click or two down from what we've been talking about. I think Lori did kind of a good job about covering some of the core themes and driving principles of the project, and Steve gave some of the high level process flow diagrams from an IT perspective. But I'm going to kind of go down a little bit more into the I guess into the weeds or into the details, if you will, to kind of show like how this was actually worked on a more micro level, I guess, if you will. And this example that I have now currently on the slide that we're displaying is this is a process that we had that was leveraging some of those 6 access models and 18 Excel files that Steve had mentioned earlier. And this is where we had finance end users that were basically sourcing data from our general ledger, pulling it into Access, running it through a series of macros and processes, and then pulling it into Excel to do their forecasting, ultimately loading it into our Essbase cube, and then taking it back out to do some more reporting. So needless to say, it was a lot of manipulation, a lot of moving data back and forth by finance folks to get this kind of process from end to end, from the source data to the kind of the end report that they shared with their downstream business partners. So what we were able to do with our planning from a enhanced reporting and data integration perspective was we were able to work with our IT partners to source this upstream data from the general ledger directly into the EPPCS planning application, build entry forms, which are showing here in the lower left-hand corner. So the forecast end users are interacting with the system and the forms to do their forecasting. They're not extracting data and running macros and doing things like that. So they would do their forecast, load it into the cube, and then what we have here on the in the lower right-hand corner is kind of the end result of the report that they share with their downstream, I guess, business partners, showing kind of what changed from forecast cycle to forecast cycle, or what's changed from budget to forecast. So basically what we're trying to show here is we've gone from a 10-step process to more of like a 2-step process, and our end users are able to spend their time doing more value-added analysis and coming up with the forecast, and less time doing the data integration and running access models in that part of the aspect of the flow. So that's a micro example. What this next slide's kind of going over to is the outputs. Steve was talking a lot about like kind of the light blue diagrams here, which are our 8 different data sources that we have. And we spent a lot of time in the project building these pipes or interfaces from the source systems into the different plan types within EPPCS or planning. But also, we didn't want to lose sight of outputs, which is one of the main reasons why we're doing a lot of the the planning process. And some of the outputs that I have called out here on the slide are the PCMCS, which are our allocation system. So we would run through our expense forecasting process, and then we would take a snapshot and then we push it downstream to our allocation system, where we allocate the expenses down to, in our case, we look at it on a product and a state and a distribution channel basis to share with our business partners. And then we take that data and then further push it downstream to our P&L and do that for our other forecasting processes. So there's definitely some downstream flows. And then we also, on the output side, we leverage SmartView. These plan types are leveraging Essbase cubes or planning cubes or plan types, if you will. So we still have all the we're able to leverage SmartView and all the Essbase skill sets that our finance users have. And we also push it downstream to some OAKS reporting that we have to compare actuals to the forecast and budget data. So this is just an example of some of the outputs that we have from the process. We didn't want to lose sight of those as we talk about inputs, calculations, and outputs. And ultimately, too, we also leverage some of the reports functionality. That's some of the advantages, I guess, of being in the cloud, is that we get some of the latest and greatest updates monthly that get pushed to the cloud. And one of those recent updates was some enhanced report functionality, where they're kind of putting some of the FR, financial report capability, directly into the EPM applications. So we're leveraging that to share with our downstream business partners and leaders to give them more insights into kind of where we're at and where we're trending from an expense forecasting perspective. This next slide is just a kind of an approach that we took in our project, or we call it the Planning Optimization Project, from a change management perspective. I think when Steve was going through his slides, we were kind of talking about the old way and the new way. So this was just an approach that that we took to basically kind of walk our current state users from kind of their comfort zone where they're currently living, I guess, in the current state process, to, you know, kind of how that's going to change, or some of the benefits. So it's kind of a way to kind of sell or show some of the benefits, kind of from the end user's perspective. So for example, in the past, in the old way, we were using a lot of our our planning cubes as data repositories. So we were basically leveraging a lot of lock and sends to hold the data and store it there. And in the new way, we're using the tool to run some calculations, use headcount and salaries to drive some other expense accounts, do some trending and things like that. So just take better advantage of the application itself and leverage some of the functionality, more so than just to merely to hold the data, I guess, or as a staging table, if you will, between this and kind of the downstream allocation processes. Some of the other old way to new way benefits too, or we had various headcount planning processes used across the enterprise. We probably had 5 different ways to forecast salaries and headcount. And in the new way, we're getting one systematic feed, and we're using a consistent approach across the entire enterprise, across all our business units. So consistency. So all this harkens back to some of the core themes that Lori had kind of started the presentation off about: simplification, efficiency. You know, those will be common themes, I guess, with the rest of the slides that I walk through. And the next slides too are just, rather than having the end users go out and kind of do their own ETL or data sourcing, we're pre-populating that into the tool for them, and again, leveraging more calculations and automating processes as much as we can. Again, we were trying to take, especially from a change management perspective, we were trying to look at it from an end user's perspective. How can we make the tool more efficient, simpler for them to use, to make their job easier, so that they can get the information faster to our downstream business partners. A good example of that would be the labor planning. Labor salary expenses are one of our largest, is our largest departmental expense account. So we wanted to spend a lot of time on that. And on the diagram that Steve was walking us through, we had a plan type dedicated towards labor planning. And I think I'd mentioned earlier that we had probably 5 different ways across the enterprise that we were forecasting labor and salaries. And what we did is we had a lot of meetings and discussions. So this was during the requirement stage and the design stage, to kind of flesh that out, to see what is kind of the best practice approach, or the best way kind of across the board. Some people were doing it by named individuals. Some people were taking more of like a high level, all associates within a given disbursement code approach. And what we landed, I think, is more kind of a Goldilocks approach, if you will, kind of in the middle, where we went to salary grade level. So this gives us enough granularity or buckets that we can forecast. So whether we're hiring a manager or a senior consultant level, or more of a specialist kind of grade level, it gives us enough ballpark there to kind of plan that with some accuracy, kind of across the board, but without having to go down to like too much information with named associates, or too little information if we're kind of taking an average across the entire disbursement code. So that was a big change, though, and one of the I guess one of the advantages of the project on the outbound side as well, though, is that we were able to, get a consensus and get at that salary grade level across the board, which enables us to source the information in from an input perspective, load it into the tool on more of a set schedule, and allow the forecasters, to expect, on business day X, the labor planning information will be there, and they can hit the ground running and start their salary and labor forecasting process. So that was, I guess, an example, I guess, of one of the big changes that we made in that space. This is just an example of the dimensionality that we had. This was the labor plan type. This was in the diagram that Steve had walked us through earlier. And it just shows the dimensionality that we have kind of in that plan type or cube, and how we forecast down to the salaries and our FTE and headcount information. And there's a couple other hierarchies that we added as well. We look at information slightly different from a roll up or supervisor perspective. So we have an alternate hierarchy in there. So this allows us to pivot the information so we can look at it different ways, I guess, and for different audiences. So that's kind of one of the powerful benefits, I guess, of the new tool. And we also included the grade, salary grade information. So again, this allows us to do some analysis, at the salary grade level, without having named associates and too much information. So again, this is kind of our what I was saying earlier was kind of our Goldilocks level of information, where we can kind of not too little and not too much, that we can kind of share with leadership and still allow the forecasters to forecast at a granularity that works for them as well. This is an example of kind of the way we implemented the labor forecast at Nationwide. We chose to use the SmartView add-in. Like I said earlier, that we've been using S-based cubes and planning for a number of years, and we have a lot of strong users in that space. So we went the route of leveraging kind of the Excel SmartView forms in that space. And what we're showing here is this would be, if you're familiar, kind of the panel view where you could go in and select your cubes if you're familiar with S-Space and that space. So that's basically part of the user interface is built into Excel and the panel. And what this is showing is the task list view of the world. So these are the different tasks kind of in a sequential logical order that the users would interact with. So they would start out by reviewing their the forecasts, the latest headcount and salary information that we're getting from Workday, which is our headcount information or salary HR information. So they would start with that, and then they would kind of proceed then through these other tasks, which would launch forms within Excel and kind of proceed through their salary and labor forecasting process. I guess the nice thing is if there weren't any changes, they could review and just get comfortable with the data, and then they're done. So if there aren't any terminations or adds, then it's a relatively straightforward process. Or if they do, then they just go into the individual tasks where they need to make changes and open up that form and enter the changes that they need to make. But again, we took the SmartView kind of Excel approach for labor. One of the other, I guess, big buckets of expenses that we have at Nationwide is something we call general expenses. So what we have is labor, I think I said, was like our largest departmental expense. But there's also some other expenses that we have modeled out at kind of different plan types. I think when Steve was showing us the diagram, we talked about the marketing. We also have one for IT expenses, depreciation, things like that, and rent. So we kind of bucketed and created some special plan types or processes around those. And that kind of accounted for, along with labor, probably like 80%, say, of our total expenses. But then we have this other 20%, so kind of the 80-20 rule, if you will. And how do we want to, forecast those other 20%? And some of those could be more material. It depends on the area or the cost center. So we came up with a number of ways to leverage the calculations within the application. A lot of these are based on trends or moving averages, some statistical things to project basically the forecasts into the future. So like I said, these represent 20% of the expenses. So these aren't like the big ticket items, but we wanted to add some calculation logic into the system to kind of allow forecasters to, if they choose, to pick a seeding methodology and kind of push those kind of expenses into the forecast into the future periods. So they could pick a given method and then layer on incremental adjustments on top of that as needed as well. So that was an approach that we took to kind of automate some of our general expense space. And these are just an example of some of the different seeding methodologies or calculations that we used. We used some like moving average pieces. We referred back to prior forecasts or prior budgets and things like that. So this basically just gives people a starting point to drive, and they could select based on the given account, based on their cost center, what kind of makes sense, and kind of have that drive their expenses into the future periods. This next series of slides I'm going to share with you guys. This was something that we put together from a change management perspective. And again, we took this approach, and I think our implementation partner here did a good job of kind of walking us through from a current state, the current way to the new way. And then again, trying to keep the user, kind of in focus as well. So what does this mean to me as a user? And I think that was kind of the common theme as we were going through this is, one where, we're trying to improve the process. We're moving to the cloud. There's a lot of kind of enterprise-wide benefits to be gained here, but there's also from a more micro level, the user, like how are they going to interact with the tool? How's this new process going to work from their point of view, I guess. So this was, this slide in particular was, or this next series of slide, I guess, kind of walks through, this kind of current way, new way. How does this impact the user? And I'll go through these relatively quickly, but I just wanted to touch on some of the benefits that we had, again, from a micro or a user perspective. In this particular slide, we were basically trying to move or migrate the users from, basically tracking things manually in Excel. Like I think we said, we had like at least 18 different Excel models, and I built some of them, so I know what some of those models were like. But we're basically trying to wean the users off of those, and instead of it capturing the information offline in a spreadsheet and then loading it later, just put it directly into the system, or have the system drive the calculations. So basically leverage the application more so than tracking it offline in an Excel model and then adjusting it and then uploading it in kind of mass. And so that's kind of what this next slide is talking about, is kind of the old state process, where we did have those 18 Excel models, and people were doing a lot of work offline in spreadsheets and then uploading it in mass. So we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to leverage the tool more, use kind of real-time updates. One of the things we were talking about was smart push. So we have like the different, on the diagram that we looked at earlier, the labor plan type. So as we make updates or add headcount or make salary adjustments upstream in the labor model, we leverage smart pushes to push those adjustments downstream. And we have a number of kind of headcount driven benefits and labor related overhead accounts downstream that are calculated automatically and pushed downstream to our OPEX or our OPEX reporting cubes. So as we make these changes kind of at an upstream granular level, the information is available downstream at a reporting kind of full up aggregated view as well. So this is kind of again, from a forecaster's perspective, all the work that we did to source those different eight data sources and data integrations into the model. What does that mean from a forecaster's user's perspective? It means that they get the data there faster. They don't have to go out and source or work with their HR data partner or other data partners. It's sourced into them. They log in, it gets loaded overnight, and then they have more time then to do their actual forecasting and analysis. So that was probably, I guess, an advantage, and again, within the efficiency core theme of the project. And we did a number of automated calculations as well. I think I alluded to as we make the labor adjustments, those push downstream some of our benefits and labor-related overhead calculations as well. So we tried to put those in where it makes sense to kind of automate the processes, and again, save the users from having to manually input things, and try to keep that to a minimum. We also did that in our rent corporate real estate space as well, where we kind of calculated the rate per square footage and have that be calculated in the system and pushed down to the different cost centers, rather than have them have to kind of calculate it and load it themselves. So we're just looking for ways, I guess, to kind of streamline the process and automate it wherever possible. And these are just some more examples of those calculations that we put through. I have a couple more slides through here, and then I'll hand it back over to Lori. But this last, one of these last slides here is about transfers. So this is where we're moving kind of expense dollars across cost centers or across areas. And we used to do this in an Excel model to track the transfers. And then we had a separate Excel process to kind of report on it, so that we could run rate and kind of give the amounts to our leadership team on, what does this transfer adjusted, forecast look like? So what we're able to do is build in some what we call account books on our side to basically have the original forecast, the transfers are captured, and then it rolls up to a transfer adjusted node. So we can basically walk from kind of the original amount, the incremental changes, and then kind of report to leadership, what does this mean kind of going forward. So it allows us to pivot between different views, and allows us to leverage the system and capture that information. One, capture the information in the system, and then two, report on it to our leadership team. And that's kind of a segue into the kind of one of the first slides I started with, were outputs, or why are we doing all this anyway? It's kind of one of the key outputs is to share the trending information with our leadership team. And we have a number of either like smart view retrieves or reports that we have built that we can refresh and update relatively quickly, and kind of just to keep track of where we're at from a are we on track with the forecast expectations before we take a snapshot and kind of make it official. So we have these reports to kind of make sure that it looks as expectations is coming through. And then after we take the snapshot, then we also have other reports too, to kind of share those trends and bubble it up to our leadership, or allow them to kind of drill down into it as well, to kind of do the analysis. And again, the variance, what's changed from a prior forecast, or where the variances from the budget and things like that. The last piece I have and then I'll hand it over to Lori, is the COE. So this was one of the big changes that we had at Nationwide too, as we stood up a new group or organization. This was I think one of the advantages of going to the cloud as well for us from a Nationwide's perspective, was that we shifted some of the work around building the reports or the forms and the calculations from our IT shop more to our finance area. So this allows us to be, I guess, a little more nimble and make some changes and kind of think things through, and just be able to respond faster, I guess, would be one way to look at it. So what is a center of excellence? There's just some definitions up here. That a center of excellence is a discipline within an organization, allows us to build out the key processes and expertise across the enterprise, a critical process or application to help an organization adopt that process and become more efficient at it. So what that means from our perspective is we have representatives from each of the different kind of expense areas that used to have, like I was talking about earlier, the 5 different models. So we've kind of pulled all those people together into one group, which we're calling our Forecasting Center of Excellence. And this gets us to, and we meet regularly, and we kind of go over, what's working well in the application, what went well last quarter, what are the opportunities for improvement, what additional reports would be beneficial to have for leadership, or if we're building a report in one area, can we kind of bring that across and kind of leverage it across the other areas within the enterprise. So it's kind of just taking more of an enterprise approach, I guess. We've spent a lot of time building consensus and doing the project, and kind of getting everything up and running. So we don't want to lose that momentum. So we want to continue to collaborate, iterate, adopt, and evolve. So it's more of a continuous improvement approach, and just kind of keep the momentum going of the project so that we can continue to make changes, enhancements, improvements, and kind of keep the ball rolling, I guess, as we go from quarter to quarter, cycle to cycle, with an eye on, I guess, continuous improvement. Yeah, this just goes through some of the more of the details where we come up with new reports and forums and test them and solicit user input and feedback and things like that. So it's just a way to kind of share best practice ideas and kind of implement them and put them into the application to kind of the benefit of everybody. So with that, I'll hand it back over to Lori to kind of go over some of the lessons learned and kind of summarize it for everybody.
Yes, thanks, Adam and Steve. So just, from a project perspective, phase one went really well. But as you're kind of thinking, if you're thinking about making the journey to the cloud yourself, some of the things to keep in mind is we are on that EPBCS SKU, not the EPM one. So you do have to still keep in mind pods and that type of thing. But if you're on the new one, I know that doesn't play into it, but just thinking about the number of users, sometimes what you ultimately end up building will dictate more of your users. So maybe thinking through how many do you need for the project, get through the project and then determine your user base may be helpful as you're working through that. Also, as Steve mentioned, the number of data sources, making sure not only do you have enough time in your project for that, but you have a good handle on the number of data sources that will be needed to do the modeling that your groups want to do in the new environment. We significantly underestimated that. Communication was key. We did a really nice job communicating amongst the finance teams, IT teams, up the chain, down the chain, and then the COEs coming into play as well in that. But we did things like town halls, we did conference room pilots. Anytime we could show people the tool while we were working through it was really well received. Good coordination between the consultants, the enterprise team, and then the staff functions and business unit areas. That was very helpful. And then keeping mindful of the project management and any delays to your timeline, and all being in the finance space, what that will do to, will you be coming into a quarter end? Will you be coming into year end? What about people who've rolled over a ton of vacation? How will you handle that? But just typical project management type of things. So those are just some of our lessons learned from the project, but we'll open it up now to any questions that the group has.
And for any questions, if you can just put it in the chat below, we will go ahead and get those answered for you.
All right, well, it doesn't look like we have any questions today. You guys did a very thorough job. It was definitely an informative, presentation. So thank you all for presenting today. If anybody does have any questions, just let us know and we'll make sure to get responses for you. And in the meantime, please stay tuned for our next Financial Services Virtual Conference Leader Roundtable, which will start at the top of the hour. Thanks, everyone.